5 minutes, okay?
Mhm.
So let's start from the beginning, if I may. So please introduce yourself.
My name is Gísli Tryggvason, and I'm an attorney at law in Iceland.
And what you've been doing in when the financial crisis happened in 2008?
Actually, I was the first one to suggest that Iceland should convene a constitutional assembly already in late November 2008, 8 weeks after the crash. And as time progressed, already in January, I was writing a draft law to implement this idea, which received a rather good response from most parties. And after some delay and opposition from the Independence Party, which in the start of February 2009 was in opposition, it was implemented by law under the name of Constitutional Assembly, and that was the plan.
And in 2008, you were already an attorney general, or what was your position?
Not attorney general. I'm an attorney at law now.
Yes.
At that time, I was a consumer spokesman, sort of state lobbyist for consumer rights. But that was unconnected to this work. I was also a member of a party that is named the Progressive Party, and it was progressive at the time, so it received the idea well and worked for it in the parliament. But later, this party, as well as the Independence Party, turned against the idea. And it was the left parties in government from February 2009 who carried it on and implemented in another way, but implemented the idea of a constitutional assembly. Then, as you know, the Supreme Court annulled the election in 2011, January. So the parliament, Alþingi, changed it from a constitutional assembly to a constitutional council and appointed the elected members to the council. So this was in short the beginning of the process, formal process.
So what was your position in the council?
My position was that I was a member. You
Yes.
mean a political position or?
No, what was your, there were 25 members, right? You were one of the 25.
Yes.
And how the work was divided between you?
Yes, I was one of 8 members of a committee that dealt with institutions in the constitution, like parliament, ministers, cabinet, and other things like that. And there was another committee on human rights mainly, and the third committee was on the justice system and the election system, inter alia. So I was, of course, I dealt with all the matters, but I was most active in the committee, the sphere of the committee of the institutions like parliament.
But let's go to the very start. So before the financial crisis happened, you were involved in politics because you were a member of the Progressive Party.
I was not very active then. I was mainly active after the financial crash. I was a member of a party, a normal, member, but I was mainly active after the crash and the years to come in both this constitutional process and the European project.
So what made you become active after the financial crisis?
I had been thinking about and working with the Constitution for a long time since I was a law student, both in Denmark and in Iceland. So I thought I had some views that were progressive and beneficial for the society. And I was one of those with the opinion that the Constitution had something to do with the financial crisis. This is very contested. Many opponents of the constitutional process say the Constitution has nothing to do with this. We don't need to amend it now, especially not in whole. But I was of the opinion, and still am, that the Constitution is like a brake in a car. It can mitigate or hinder an accident, car crash. And I think the financial crisis would not have evolved here in Iceland like it did if we would have had a better constitution then, with more checks and balances. That's the click word for saying what we were doing. We were trying to make more checks and balances in some ways, like in America.
Okay. So tell me, what can you elaborate on what was wrong with the constitution that exists now and the one that you were trying to change?
Yes, that would take more than half an hour, but the main
in
thing
short,
is
maybe, key points.
Yeah, key points is this, that more balance of power, more checks and balances, less power to ministers and more checks on ministers, more power to the people by referendums and even initiatives, better frame for the justice system to work, and better composition of the justice system. One of the things that we suggested was a term limit on ministers, better clauses on foreign policy and transfer of power to supranational institutions like the EU, which some of us wanted to at least facilitate or make possible. A better frame for the president, who is mainly a figurehead in Iceland. We wanted, I was at least of the opinion that we could make his position a little bit stronger, not much stronger, but a little bit stronger in order to balance out the power of parliament. Because one of the problems we have had for decades here in Iceland is a lack of limits of the power of the ruling party, who unfortunately is mainly the Independence Party, who in turn has for decades decided more or less who are the judges in this land and who are the high officials in this land. So until recently, we had almost no judges or high officials that weren't male, middle-aged, conservative men, either members of this party or affiliated to it, or at least not opposed to it. So we had almost no women almost no leftists, almost no or like less people from the province. So one of the things that I wanted more of were more power to the provinces. So there was a lot wrong with the old constitution that is almost 140 years old in the basis. But of course, there is a lot in the constitution that still is in force that is good, and we kept this.
And how do you think, what were the mistakes that the government did in tackling the financial crisis? Or maybe what did they do wrong before the financial crisis happened? What is your take on that? Also quite short if possible, and then we'll move forward.
Many things in that is area are outside my core competence, but
why was it why was it important to take the power from the ministers, for example? As I understand, it is somehow connected to the financial crisis, right? And tackling the financial crisis.
You know, the leaders of the two parties, mainly now three parties that are in coalition government, has for many decades been too much. So by sharing power and giving more checks on the both ministers and mainly the leaders of the coalition parties, we wanted to limit the failure or hinder the failures that were made. One of the things that people talked about in the Constitutional Council was, although unrelated to the financial crisis, it was that two men, the leaders of the coalition government in 2003, decided to back the United States in I think it was called the Coalition of the Willing in the Iraq War. This was not there was no procedure in cabinet, let alone parliament or foreign policy committee, until it was too late. So this is an example, and other examples are the strong relations between the ruling parties then, the Progressive Party and the Independence Party, to people that you could almost call oligarchs, like in Russia. It was not as bad as in Russia, thankfully, but it was bad, in my opinion, how politics and business was too interwoven.
Got you. And you, your position was that by changing the constitution, this intertwining between the business and politics can be broken, yeah, or
yes, hindered or mitigated. And I was not saying, and other people were not saying, that a good constitution or a better constitution would solve all problems. We did not say the weather would be great with a new constitution, but many things would be greater with a new constitution, or have the possibility to be greater. We were not saying it would solve all our problems, but the ruling elite and academia responded late, and when they saw that this was happening, they responded forcefully against it. And the electorate or the public was too little interwoven in it, and they didn't see the constitution as a solution to bread and butter problems or daily problems. But I think still that we should look at the foundation, like the constitution, when we are solving deep and old and big problems like political corruption.
Was the movement to change constitution big before the financial crisis? Have you ever thought of changing the constitution prior the financial crisis? Was it something that people discussed often?
No, it was not. It was almost not a movement. I, at least, didn't get this idea until late November 2008, 8 weeks after the financial crisis. But a big persona in Icelandic politics had, in fact, suggested a similar thing, an advisory constitutional council, as it happened to end. And this was Jóhanna Sigurðardóttir, who was the prime minister just after the crash in the government that the left parties formed on February the 1st, 2009, and continued after the election in April 2009. So she, some 14 years before, around 94 or 95, she had proposed this, I think, more than once in Parliament, that we should have a revision of the constitution, as many had said, but she proposed this form of or procedure of advisory constitutional council. So she was in late for the last decades the first, and I think only, that suggested it before the financial crisis. But before, in the 40s and 50s, there were many, and later, many commissions of parliamentarians that thought we should amend the constitution, because it was always a provisional one, thought as. But this new idea from Jóhanna Sigurðardóttir, and then people like me after the financial crisis, said that it should not be parliamentarians or Alþingi, the parliament, who should change it, but forces outside, people on the regular people.
And I heard that the constitution, the Icelandic constitution, was written by Danes.
Yes.
What people think of this? Is it a sensitive topic?
Maybe not sensitive, but nobody, I think, knows exactly who wrote it. It might have been an Icelandic lawyer in Copenhagen, at least involved in it, but it was the Danish government or the officials of the king then in 1874 that first wrote the constitution and handed it over to us unilaterally as a gift for our 1,000 years settlement anniversary. And although this was a great progression in our independence and human rights, it was not at that time well received, because it did not address the special situation of Iceland. We wanted our situation as a country more better addressed, and so this was unilateral, although well done in many ways. And this was written after, I think, the Belgian and the French constitutions prior to that. And yeah, most likely it was written by Danes or Danish officials and presented to us in 1874, and then amended several times, but always very little, always just the parts that was mostly in need of revision at each time. So in 1944, when we got our total independence from Denmark and founded a republic, then the politicians were in agreement that this would be revised in a few years. But we still have this provisional constitution from 1944, which is rather little changed from the 1874 constitution.
Okay, let's move forward. So what made you get involved in this campaign? Why you thought you are the person who has to be involved in the process?
Yes, I can't remember. We had 523 candidates, I think, for the election, and the reason for me to make myself a candidate was that I had this prehistory of suggesting it already in November 2008 and writing or co-writing 2 or 3 bills on implementing it. So I thought I had something to say about both the structure and the process. And also I thought I had some material ideas if it came to reality, as it did. As a matter of fact, I wrote, I think, 30 or 40 blog posts in order to say what I wanted to do. And that had to do with the justice system and the institutions in government and more power to the province and all kinds of things. I talked very little about human rights because I thought this chapter from revised in 1995 was rather up to date in comparison to the others. But when it came to the Constitutional Council, we changed that a lot too. And maybe that was a mistake because it was rather recent. And the changes were rather maybe too radical in some areas. So the reason for me to suggest myself was that I had something to say in my own opinion, and the electorate agreed. Also, I had many pillars to stand on, and I had this vision of more power to the province. I had some vision as a consumer spokesman from that perspective, and previously I had worked for the Academic Association, so I had some views regarding workers' rights. And also I was a member then active in the Progressive Party, so I had some support from there, at least before they shifted and turned against the project. So, and also I was a lawyer. I was one of, I think, only 4 lawyers that were elected to the council. And that was fine, in my opinion. I thought the Constitutional Assembly or council should not consist of mainly lawyers. So I think this is
but
some of the reasons that I
for color, so to say, do you remember where you were that you realized that I want to get involved? I understand that it is something that was brewing in your mind for quite a while. But when did you think, like, that's I want to do something about this?
No, I don't remember a specific time or picture. I remember some of the sessions I had to introduce myself and writing the blog posts and some meetings. But I think actually I was rather sure that if it came to reality, what I suggested already in November 2008, I would be a candidate, and thankfully I was successful. And maybe part of that was that a friend of mine and a relative of mine also were candidates. And when they did not succeed, I think their electors voted for me as a number 2. You know, it was a good election system that you could vote for people in sequences. So yeah, that was, I think it was from the start that I thought I would like to be part of this process. And in my view, many of the later opponents to this project, they were also of the opinion that we should change the constitution, but it was just them who should write it. Many lawyers that I know were fine with changing the constitution, but they should hold the pen, not us or the public. So egos are always a problem, but in our work, egos were not a problem, not a big problem, because we came from various factions and worked well together and finished it in 4 months, which is a short time, and were unanimous in our suggestions.
And speaking of your blog post, and you said also you were drafting bills. So where did you publish this this suggestion that you made in November? What do you mean that you published it?
No, I did not publish the suggestion. That was the suggestion was first made at a meeting in the Progressive Party in a committee that was called, I think, the Democratic Committee or something, on November 28th. Mm-hmm. And it was so well received that the party institutions, mainly the parliamentarians of this party, asked me to draft a bill, which I did. Later, the government, then in power, the left government, made me a member of a committee of 3 lawyers, I think, to draft a new bill. And later, a third bill, I think, came through after the opposition of the Independence Party. Then it had been watered down from a powerful constitutional assembly to an advisory constitutional assembly, which was much worse, in my opinion. So that was the main failure and mistake that the government or people in power made, that it was made advisory. So in the end, both the Supreme Court and the Parliament could stop it. And I foresaw this and suggested in the start that the Constitutional Assembly should be omnipotent or all-powerful, and Parliament should only be one of the institutions that was asked of their opinion. They should not be asked to ratify it. That made the Independence Party and many parliamentarians furious, to make Parliament just opinion makers. They should decide, and because they were able to decide this, that a watered down bill was in the last moment agreed upon, then the Parliament could do what it has done now for 9 years, ignore it. So in my opinion, we should have had not an advisory constitutional council, but or assembly, but a binding with a referendum that would make it go in force. And so my suggestions, I think, were right in the start, and the mistake was to make it just advisory.
Mm-hmm. So you wanted to avoid any interference from
blocking.
Yeah.
You know, interference is fine, or opinions are fine, but I wanted to shortcut from the Parliament, because I thought it was a possibility, although distant, that Parliament would ignore our suggestions, but it did. So my idea, which I in one blog post called a coup d'etat by Parliament, Alþingi, it was real. It came to reality, sadly. Mm-hmm. And you asked where I posted these blog posts. I posted some of them in AN website, some of them in DV website, and I think many of them are available. But after the process, when we had drafted a new constitution and given it to Parliament to chew on it, then I wrote 114 blog posts on each and every article to explain it. and was mainly short posts, but I started with saying what is in the Constitution now about this, how it is changed, and what effect it will have. So I was trying to inform the public of what we had done. So it was available. I don't know how well read it was. Some people wanted me to publish it in a book, but I sadly have not done this yet. And the Constitution is just a draft still.
Mm-hmm. But speaking of your campaign, what do you think helped you to win the campaign?
The three things that I mentioned before, that I had a long experience as a law student and lawyer with the Constitution. I had shown some initiative, and I had backing from different communities. Consumers maybe liked my work, academics or workers maybe liked my work, and then I was a member of this progressive party. So I had support from at least three factions, and hopefully my agenda also, my provincial government, no, not provincial, but the more power to the provinces, was to some liking, I think. So I think those are the reason that I was elected. And also I could say that, as many opponents have pointed out, it was almost only, with one or two exceptions, almost only people in the media or in the public sphere that were elected. No less known people were elected. It was mainly media people, former politicians, lobbyists like maybe me. Yeah. So
do you think it is a good thing?
No, that was a bad thing, but this is just the reality. But I would like more people of merit would have been elected, and less people of maybe for being famous. Although I think I was not just elected for being famous, but having something to add.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a reality that almost only well-known people were elected, and not maybe good people that were less known. And also I think it was a bad thing that most of the members were liberal or leftist like me, or center. There were too few conservatives or right-wing people there. So the opponents later could say, yeah, this is just a bunch of leftists and Eurocrats.
But do you think, knowing that people with sort of some public background were elected, makes it fair to say that the Constitution was drafted by the people?
Yes, I think, because firstly, we based some of our ideas, or many of them, on the convention of the not elected, but randomly picked members of the, I don't know what it is called in English, Þjóðfundur. 1,000 people came together and came with ideas. So we based some of our suggestions on that. And also we were mostly unrelated to the power machine of the parties. And we were not members of parliament. And this was in good agreement with my first bill, or my first suggestions, that I think only parliamentarians sitting in Alþingi now could not be members of the Constitutional Council. But we would not say that former parliamentarians would not be able to be elected, and we had some of those, and that was a good addition. It was a good mix. So although we were mostly famous or semi-famous people, we were part of the people more than the elite. or the power, and the elites turned against us, both Supreme Court, Parliament, academia, some media. The media did not show much interest for it when it was happening.
We'll come back to this later, but just to close the campaign thing, I just want to ask you, what was the message of your campaign? How did you promote yourself? Very briefly, if you can. Because as I understand, the campaign was that you actually came to different groups of people and presented yourself, right? What was your message to them?
Yes.
How did you sell yourself?
I had some meetings or took part in some meetings and wrote these blog posts and was maybe in media. And I presented myself as a lawyer with some insight in this, and progressive who wanted to limit, install checks and balances and give more power to the provinces and less power to Reykjavik, the capital, and less power to the institutions. But I did not want to eliminate political parties or set them aside. Some of the members were very radical in this. They saw political parties as a problem. I did not see it that way. So checks and balances is again the short version of my agenda, I think.
Okay. So let's move to the drafting process. So you were chosen among 25 other people. You were divided to 3 committees, right? How this process worked? Was the parliament anyhow involved in working with you? What were the relations?
Yes, they were not much involved, and I think in hindsight it would have been better to have a bigger relation to the parliament and more communication both ways. But the parliament, Alþingi, that appointed us after the Supreme Court decision to annul the election, they did not interfere much in how we should do it or what we should do. They gave us a kind of carte blanche, to do what we thought was best. And the first days started, I think, with electing our leadership and drafting our rules of procedure. And that is funny historically, because in 1851, when we had a constitutional assembly, advisory as well, as a part of our independence process, it was cut short by the king's representative, because he said when it had been going on for too long, in his opinion, he said, "You're just drafting the procedure rules. You're not doing what you should do." We started early with this and finished it and started with the material process of drafting a new constitution. But as I said before, we kept those clauses or those things in the existing constitution that we thought were good. So maybe 70% of the constitution in force is still in the new draft. It's not like 50-50 or something. I think most people agree that at least 2/3 of the existing constitution, maybe more, were kept.
Mm-hmm. And how many people were in your committee, and what were your main proposals, if you can explain to us?
Yes, there were 8 members of each committee, and the chairman of the council was in no committee, I think, so that adds up to 25. We had to do with the municipalities and the parliament and the government or cabinet. So it was, and the president, and it came to my surprise we used a lot of energy and time to discuss the president. I thought the president or the office of the president would be a minor thing, but it was a major thing. And people in the committee and in the council as a whole were on a broad spectrum. Some would like to abolish the president and make rid of this figurehead. Some wanted the opposite and make the political system more like a presidential democracy or presidential parliamentarism like in France or Finland or even in America. But that was not the majority. The majority wanted to keep the parliamentarism. That is, that the president has to listen to the parliament when he appoints a government. So the president has no real say in choosing a government. It is the parliament, like in Finland, like in at least Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, which I know the best. So the middle position was one I took, that we should keep the parliamentarism, but make the power of the president a little bit more in order to do checks on government appointments of judges and high officials. So we didn't change a lot of his power, but we tried to also make it more foreseeable what for the electorate, what government they would have, and looked at the Swedish and I think the German procedure for choosing a government, because here it is rather unforeseeable after an election which kind of government you get. But in Norway and Denmark, for example, you know on election night almost always who is the prime minister next day. It's just a formality for the Queen to appoint a prime minister because coalitions have decided on beforehand who to appoint. But here it is maybe wheeling and dealing in the night after an election who comes into a coalition government and who gets to be a prime minister. And that is still true, unfortunately.
So your constitution was drafted, everything was ready. What were your feelings before the referendum happened?
Yes, maybe not everything was ready because we were disbanded, or our term limit was over just after we finished the constitution itself. And then it was not done to write explanatory comments on it. So it was rather loosely done. I think it was maybe some chairman of the committees and some employees of the council who wrote this, and it was not democratically decided upon. I had some opinions on the comments, but it was not accepted by the council. It was not, the council was non-existing then. So it was a problem that you could debate afterwards what was the meaning of this clause and who wrote this comment and so on. This is also a problem for Parliament. When you get a bill there with comments, you don't always know which lawyer, mainly lawyers, write this, who wrote this. It's just an unknown official in a government, or maybe a lobbyist outside government. So it's a problem also there, but this was a problem that it was not completely done in this sense, that comments were not ready. But of course, the comments were based on our committee works and such things.
Anyway, it made to the referendum, right?
Yes, and the referendum was, I think, on October the 20th. I was not very active due to personal reasons in the weeks up to that, but I, of course, was very very excited how it would go, and the public, the draft was well received by the public, although only maybe 50% chose to come to the booth. That is not the main thing, I think. It's rather high in a referendum with a non-binding effect, but those who took to the booth or the polls, they were happy with our results and applauded it. In one exception, I think, the church clause, where we debated a lot, the public took another position and wanted state and church still to be loosely connected. And that, in my opinion, showed that the public was just not just saying yes to all our things, because the yeses were not as high in each case, and it was a no, a low no in the church clause thing. But of course, it was a problem that Parliament only asked 5 or 6 questions, 5 concrete questions, and one general on using the draft for a new constitution. And this would be debated for the next 10 or 12 years and will still, as not being clear enough, or you could always debate what about the provisions that were not asked about, and what do you mean by a base? Can you change one letter or one comma? We were often accused of not wanting to change one comma of our draft, but in my opinion, I could always debate each clause if any arguments came for it to be changed, but very little substantial criticism came. It was just some generalities, it's too long, too lofty, all kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. Well, you said that you were foreseeing that something can go wrong with the process, but when was your understanding that things are going the wrong way after the referendum, or maybe even earlier than that?
Yeah, I was not just foreseeing that something would go wrong. I was afraid that what went wrong in the end would go wrong. That is, Parliament and the power establishment would stop this and ignore our suggestions. Therefore, I wanted the Constitutional Assembly to be binding with, of course, a referendum and circumventing the Parliament. And because they did not do that, but only chose to have it advisory, or only had the power, political power, to make it advisory, then the Supreme Court and mainly Parliament could ignore the will of the people, in my opinion. So what could go wrong went wrong in the worst way. That still 11 years after, or 10 years after the referendum, I think we still don't have a new constitution, and the politicians are still doing what they have done for 80 years. That is drafting suggestions of minimal changes and not agreeing upon anything. So in my opinion, Parliament has shown for 80 years, or almost 80 years, that they are both incompetent to do this and inhabile, or there is a conflict of interest. It's like you go to work someplace, you make an agreement with your employer. What is your power and what is your wage and such? They are deciding all this themselves unilaterally, instead of the people who hired Parliament to choose what frame of work they should work in. So what went wrong did in the worst possible way.
But when
Because
exactly, when exactly was that you realized, or it feels like it will not be accepted?
yeah,
Yeah.
one particular moment I remember well was because after this I went into party politics and tried to come into parliament, Alþingi, to follow this through, but it was unsuccessful. But when we were just before the election, seeing that the then leader of the Social Democrats, Árni Páll Árnason, he was he failed us at the main hour of time. You know, he was almost treasonous, in my opinion, to his political party program by saying that this should not be a thing or should not go through. So this lawyer colleague of mine, he failed us at the main hour, you know, and that was the moment I saw that this was probably not going through this time, because it was very short of, at least, that we could line up a majority for the electorate to implement this. We always knew that the Independence Party was against and were sabotaging the project from the start, and Progressive Party, sadly, they turned against it, although it had originated from them, as I suggest pointed out first. So we only had to rely on the leftist parties and the Pirates, I think, but the left Green Party was always a little bit wishy-washy about it, and the Social Democrats, the Samfylking, they were the main proponent of the movement to implement it. And when their new leader, Árni Páll Árnason, who succeeded Jóhanna Sigurðardóttir as chairman of that party, when he failed, it was a failure at that time in my mind, already in 2013.
What did you feel? What was your reaction?
Yeah, mainly anger and disappointment in him, because he was in a leading position to say go or not go, and he failed this.
So why do you think he failed you? What is why the elites went into the opposition to the whole project?
I don't know why he specifically failed, but I know that although he is a lawyer and quite experienced one, many of the lawyer politicians in Independent Party and other parties, as Árni Páll Árnason, then leader of the Social Democrats, they hadn't even read the thing. And for many years, even recently, I have had lawyers and parliamentarians and prospective parliamentarians and academics criticize the project. And when I asked them at the meeting, can you name just one thing that you can criticize or say why it should be otherwise? You can see that they haven't read it recently, or almost some of them not read it at all. And one parliamentarian, which I will not name, former parliamentarian and a lawyer, he criticized it first, and then he met me later, and then he had read it and said it's not such a bad thing, which was a compliment from him. So I remember a meeting with he's a former judge and now an advocate, attorney like me, and vice member of parliament, Arnar Þór Jónsson. He has been very critical of it, and at a meeting for 2-3 years ago, I asked him this one question: can you name what things in the constitution draft is bad? Then he said, I haven't actually read it so well, or I'm not able to. So I think this should be on the record, that many opponents had not read it, and other followed. Because I've been saying for 10 years, if anyone would debate any clause in this draft, I would like to do so. I'm well prepared. I wrote all these blog posts about each clause, and I would like to see constructive criticism, what should been done better.
So what was this process of you drafting, of you then holding a referendum? What was this process for the elites? Were they skeptical? What was it for them?
I think the main thing, although it was not always said or seldom said, is the ownership or the control over the fisheries quota. You know, it's the power and money of society that is the main obstacle. As we know in other corrupt countries like Ukraine or Russia, we know it's the power, follow the money, the power and the money. So that is for many, the real opposition is based upon the fisheries system, which I think received over 80% of yeses in the referendum. But they always put it in a costume of other things, you know, formalities or lofty lofty words and such. Of course, we made mistakes. As I mentioned before, I think we should have changed the human rights chapter a little less and a little more concrete. That is not enough reason to oppose the whole project.
And what was the constitution, the new constitution, saying about the fishery quota? What was your proposal and why it was important to be made?
Yeah, it was mainly saying the same thing as simple law from parliament has been saying for 30 years or so, that the nation or the people is the owner of the fisheries resources, and not just a lofty vision of the nation owning something, but also how to implement it, that the fishing quota is to be not sold and only leased to a real or right market price, or yeah, not just given or leased for too little money or sold. Because for decades now, families have been dealing with this in inheritance and in divorces as it was real property. It's one of the biggest assets in society, and it's hidden, and it's not agreed upon democratically to have it like this. It has been just evolving through practice in the justice system, for instance. So this is the main change that the elite or the ruling parties and power people are opposing, mainly the fishery system.
Am I correct that you wanted through the constitution to make the fishery system, to make it belong to the people instead of private businesses?
Yes. Or maybe not changing the fishery system so much, because many of us in the Constitutional Council, I think, saw that we have a good fishery system, effective and maybe leading in the world. But we wanted the proceeds or the revenue of it to be more evenly, democratically, or yeah, better distributed between the people and the taxpayers, instead of some few oligarchs, as we see too many examples of. So this is one of the main things. And of course, the lawyers for the elite, they debated such niceties as whether a nation or people can own something, but that's just some, what should I say, bullshit from old Danish law books that of course can be changed with a constitution from the people.
But when in your council you realized that you need to make changes within the fishery system, why it felt like, was it a very important thing for your council to change the
Yes,
fishery system? Yeah.
I think all people, both in the council, outside the council, and both people who voted for it and against it, knew that this would be the main political argument of our work. It has been the hottest political issue for 30 years at least, since maybe 83, when the system was established by law and regulations, and mainly since 1988, when the quotas in the fisheries system were made transferable by law. And accidentally or incidentally, it was a left government that decided this. Has wondered many people. And in a recent television series, a very popular Icelandic television series, this was debated or shown how it happened in a very clever way. So there was no surprise to anyone that this would be the hottest theme. And other things like the church or the president was peripheral should have been peripheral and was mainly peripheral.
Mm-hmm. Just 3 last questions, moving to the end. So tell me how the parliament, and the parliament, I think, should have changed already several times since the referendum, right? How the parliament is able to stop the constitution from being accepted?
It's because in the existing constitution, it says how the constitution is changed. It's by 2 parliaments and an election in between. And this we knew, of course, and everybody else knew how the constitution was formally changed. Therefore, my original proposition, as I mentioned, was to change this clause in the constitution, that this time, or maybe in the future, the constitution should be changed by a constitutional council and accepted in a referendum. But instead, we still have the old clause of 2 parliaments, and a general election in between is the proper mode or procedure to change the constitution. So it was foreseeable for everybody that Parliament could change this if the Constitutional Council only was to be made advisory. Therefore, I wanted it not to be advisory, but with power to the people. What was the other question?
How the parliament is able to stop this process?
Yes,
yeah.
It can mainly ignore our suggestions and refuse to make the draft a new constitution. It has the formal power.
So if I understand right, it means that there should be some political will coming from the parliament, right, to make this happen. Do you think this will ever happen?
I doubt it, because if it is not possible in a crisis like this, when should it be possible? You know, opponents and people who were not interested said, why should we talk about the constitution now? We have to think about the prices and the houses and the debt and all kinds of things. So many people said this is not the right time. But then again, many people think there is never the right time to change the constitution, not even when we are not dealing with a crisis like this. There's always a crisis. You know, you had the COVID, and then you have the the war in Ukraine. You can always wait for a new crisis, but the opponents mean say that never is the right time to change the constitution, at least like we want.
Do you think general public what does general public think of this development?
I think some people are well informed and know that the constitution can be key to some improvements or major improvements, but I think the general public doesn't know how important a new constitution is. And that is what we fail to do, inform the public that this is an important thing. It's no strange thing that in America, one of the oldest and strongest and in many ways best democracies, and also the worst, but in many best democracies in the world, the constitution is the basis, and very alive one and debated one. And in France, also an example of democracy and rights in historical views, at least, the constitution is a main thing. Also in Denmark, the constitution has great respect. Norway, so great democracies know that the constitution is very important, and you have to take care of having it in a good shape. And young and stupid democracies like maybe ours are not aware of this.
Do you think you achieved your personal goal?
In this respect?
In this process from November 2008 to now, I don't know.
No, I have failed, and therefore I have drawn myself out of politics for the last 9 years, I think. So I'm only a spectator mainly, but I always welcome academia and journalists to talk to me and follow the debate. But I couldn't continue for many years or decades fighting on the barricades for the new constitution. I had been thinking about the constitution for 20 years or more when I finally realized that I had to change focus to my law practice and other personal things. So I have not achieved my goal, my personal goal to change the constitution yet, and I'm rather pessimistic, not totally, but rather pessimistic that it will happen soon.
But why it's affected you so much?
Affected me? It's something that I have been thinking about since almost gymnasium in the 80s, but at least the late 80s. But I have been thinking about this from the start of the 90s, that is for almost 25 years, although I'm only 52 years old. I've been thinking about this since I was around 20, and I managed to both get this idea in the political arena, and although in a watered down version, an advisory version, it was accepted. And it came through, although the Supreme Court was against it, but then it failed by inaction of Parliament and opposition in Parliament, and in my view, corrupt politicians and corrupt politics.
But why these events made you stop being in politics?
I had been a public persona for many years as a general secretary for the Academic Association of Academics, and then consumer spokesman. I had been a public persona for 15 years, and I had been very public in this fight. I had been thinking about and then writing about the Constitution for 20 years or something. So I was mainly tired to do the same thing. So I'm just working on my law firm and my family and my gardening. But I always welcome a discussion. If anybody would like to discuss this draft and mainly lawyers to criticize it. I'm still waiting for the debate.
So it was just a closing chapter for your career with
No.
the idea.
I was not so active in politics. You know, I was a lobbyist for almost 15 years for consumers and workers, but now I'm a practicing attorney. So I'm in the media sometimes, and I'm working with the existing constitution all the time. I'm challenging law on constitutional grounds sometimes. So I'm not retired, although I'm tired of this battle.
Yeah, I see. Well, that's it. Thank you very much for this, and sorry that it took me much longer.